the 60s had broken open something, and I think the 70s was when, people were starting to say, okay, we're going for this and we're not going back,
Hello, my name is Kay Anderson, and you are listening to Lost Spaces, the podcast that mourns the death of queer nightlife. Every episode, I talk to a different person about a venue from their past, the memories they created there, and the people that they used to know. I've got a little bit of a story for you before we get into this week's episode. So you may know this already because I go on about it surprisingly quite a lot for a show that's got nothing to do with this. But I am a big fan of Grease 2, which I think is definitely the superior film of the Greases. And having heard me rant about it on a previous episode with Demi Wild, a user on Twitter, Renfrew, who's also a long-time listener of the show, so hello, reached out to disagree. And we had a little bit of a back and forth about it, which got me thinking about Grease, which led me to Wikipedia, which led me to a bit of a wiki-hole, where I looked up basically everything about both the films, and now I have an encyclopaedic knowledge of them. But one of the things that I didn't know before I fell into this wiki-hole is what happened to the singer of my absolute favorite song from the Grease soundtrack, which is, obviously, It's Raining on Prom Night. And my internet sleuthing led me to the singer-songwriter Cidny Bullens. Cidny has had a long and fascinating career and made the brave decision to transition in 2010 in his early 60s. So we're kind of somewhat stretching the theme this week. And rather than talk about one lost physical space, we're talking about the spaces that were created on the 1975 Elton John West of the Rockies Tour. Cidny was a backup singer on this tour and is currently in the process of writing his memoirs. So he had a ton of stories and insights to share about that experience and about creating magic in front of an audience of people every evening.
I was living in Los Angeles and just kind of hanging around this one particular studio, Cherokee Recording in Los Angeles, and who I knew the owners to. They were brothers who were my age or a little older, I guess, because I was only 24, 25 years old. So in 74, I started doing some backup singing and stuff like that. And in September of 75, I heard from my friends at Cherokee Studio that there was going to be a press party for Neil Sedaka, who was a songwriter, singer, had some hits in the 60s. And Rocket Records, Elton's record label at the time, was signing him to a new contract. And Cherokee was hosting a press party in Studio A, the big studio there. And I heard about it, and I thought, I'm going. And so I walked into Cherokee, and like I said, the guys were good friends of mine, three brothers and their father, and the three brothers were really good friends, and I had done demos there and was hanging out there. And I walked into the control room where they all were kind of observing this press party that was going on, kind of like a fishbowl. We were looking into a fishbowl of this press party.
So is it kind of like one of those old studios? So you were in the studio bit and they were in the other way around.
We were in the control room.
Okay, and they were all in the actual studio.
Exactly. Yes, It was a big studio, big old-time studio. So Elton John was in there. And I was a huge fan, He was Elton John, for God's sake. It was 1975. Goodbye Yellow Brick Road and all that, And I turned to the guys and I said, I'm going in. And D. Rob, who was the oldest brother and kind of the head honcho, turned to me and said, "You can't go in there." And I said, "Yes, I can." I did. I walked in and I stood there. I remember exactly what I had on for clothes. And I was tall and skinny, and I had on bell bottoms and my big fry boots, and I had on this rock and roll jacket that was embroidered in the back. A tiger was embroidered. It was purple and green, and it was embroidered in the back.
So you were the shit then.
Yeah, and I had my big blonde, curly, naturally curly, wavy, I should say, not curly, wavy hair, which was the 70s cut, that mane, I say in my show, the mane of 70s hair. And I was just standing there, and I went up to somebody and started a conversation, and the guy engaged with me. And before I knew it, out of the corner of my eye, I saw Elton walking toward me. And for a minute I thought, uh-oh, he's going to kick me out. Well, we all know now that Elton John would not be the person who would kick me out of his own party. But that was the thought I had. I thought, uh-oh, he's going to kick me out.
Sprung.
And he walked straight to me and he said, and I quote, and I know this is true because it's in my journal from back then. He said, "I don't believe we've met yet. My name is Elton." And honestly, I went blank. I just went blank.
So you forgot your name, or?
All I could remember, I don't even remember if he asked me my name. I just remembered saying, "My name is Cindy." And I say in my memoir, if I had said my name was Chris or Sandy or some non-gender name, the mystery would have gone on because I looked like a guy. I was androgynous, completely and totally androgynous. I was called sir as much as I was called ma'am back then, or miss back then. And really, you could not tell. And that was who I was. That was me. I wasn't putting anything on. I wasn't pretending. I wasn't dressing up for a reason. That was me. That was my wardrobe. That was my look. I knew that I felt like a man in a woman's body. I didn't have a name for it. There was no name for it back in the 70s that I knew of, except maybe transsexual. Transgender was not a term that came in until the 80s. And I know now that he didn't know whether I was a man or a woman. I didn't know then. So the mystery was over in a matter of seconds. No man is named Cindy that I know of. And we talked. Now, I really have no clue what we talked about. I don't have any idea what the conversation was after I said my name. And he walked away after a few minutes, but he didn't kick me out. And a few minutes later, a little while later, somebody else came up to talk to me. I wasn't kicked out, and Elton had talked to me, so I was good, right? So then a young woman walks up to me and introduces herself as Connie Pappas. And she says, "What do you do?" And I said, with a cocky voice, "I'm a singer." I figured I was in the room. I might as well say, because that's what I was doing. I was singing backups. I was already a songwriter and I already played guitar and I already, was a musician. But back then, the way I was making my way into the music business was singing. So I said, "I'm a singer." And she said, "Okay, great." And we talked for a few minutes. Again, I don't really remember what about. And she walked away, and I was there and had a few more conversations. And as I was getting ready to leave, I feel a tap on my shoulder, and it was Connie Pappas. And she says to me, "What are you doing for the next 2 months?" And I said, I don't know why. And that's exactly what I said. Even though I did know what I was doing. And that's another story, and I'll tell you in a minute. But I guess I had the sense to say, I don't know why. And she said, Elton wants to know if you want to go on the road with him.
Wow.
And this was Wednesday, September 17th, 1975. On Thursday, I had to make a decision whether to go on the road with Elton John or go on the road with Bob Dylan.
Oh, just a regular Thursday then.
Yes, a regular Thursday. I had been asked because, and this is a whole nother part of my story, this was in September. In July, I had been part of a week in New York City that was hosted by Bobby Newworth, who was a legend at the time. He wrote Mercedes-Benz with Janis Joplin. He was Dylan's best friend. He had his own albums out and was produced and, was kind of one of these people who was a manifester, a doer, a connector. You know what I mean? His name wasn't well known, but he connected everybody. And he had met me and liked me from the start, thought I was talented songwriter, ironically. So I had been part of this week at what used to be the bitter end, but was temporarily the other end because of something in New York City on Bleecker Street, one of the venerable folk clubs. The bitter end people will know, but it was called the other end for a minute and a half. And that was the minute and a half we were there. And Newworth had this week of performances that he had booked where he was going to have everybody on God's green earth come in and play. Anybody who was in town, and he recruited me for the band, and he flew me into New York from Los Angeles, and me and T-Bone Burnett, and who has since become a very famous record producer, David Mansfield, who we met that week, who's also a big name now, and Stephen Souls, who was a singer-songwriter back then. And we were the band, and there was a drummer and a bass player. And we were going to be the backup band and the singers for whoever walked in, which included Patti Smith, Mick Ronson, Joan Baez, Allen Ginsberg. Wow. Oh my God, I'm forgetting so many people as we speak. But it was a lineup of people just coming in, stepping on stage and playing a song for a week. And Dylan was there for the entire week, observing, but he was there. I have pictures. So this week in July, and we were written up in Rolling Stone. I had my picture in Rolling Stone and the New York Times and the Soho Weekly News and all this stuff. I was written up. I had my own song. So it was kind of a big thing for me because I was noticed among all of these people. Anyway, out of that week came the idea, the genesis for the Rolling Thunder Review, which Bobby Newworth came up with, and Dylan. So I, over the course of the next month or so, of course, was asked to go on the Rolling Thunder Review with Bob Dylan, which they were starting in September, the next week, or the next 2 weeks. I can't remember the exact timing. So September 17th, I meet Elton John. He's starting rehearsal on September 19th, on Friday. I meet him on Wednesday. On Thursday, I'm supposed to start rehearsal with the Rolling Thunder like the next week. So on this Thursday, I literally had to make a decision between going with Elton John or going with Bob Dylan.
Wowzers.
So, you know which one I picked.
I do. But before we get into the reason behind that decision, can we just find out a bit more about who you were at that time? So we already know that you were singing. We already know that you had a mane of hair. But what brought you to LA? Like, what was the reason that you were there in the first place?
Well, I went to LA to literally, I mean, this is such a cliche line, but it was to find my fame and fortune. You know, I mean, I went to New York for a year or so after high school. And I went to acting school for a while in New York City. So I guess 2 years, because I went to acting school for 2 years, the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. And even though I said to my mother after I graduated high school, I'm going to New York City to be a rock and roll star. I want to be in music. I want to play music. I was writing songs. I was singing, you know, all through high school. I mean, I knew what I wanted to do. And she said, no, you're going to go to school. Now, this is back in the days when mothers actually had something to say to their children that made them do things, you know. And my mother was very strong.
But surely she didn't think that acting was going to be more stable than singing.
You know what? Well, I think what she thought, no, you're absolutely correct. But what she thought, and she knew I could act. I mean, I'd been in plays in high school and stuff like that. But it wasn't my first choice. Music was my first choice. But I think what she thought is that acting, that I had to go to a school, that at least if I went to an institution, that I went to some place where I had to show up every day, where there was a schedule, where there was, you know, some learning going on of somehow. And I also think she thought that acting was more respectable than rock and roll. I don't think she thought through the fact. In fact, I know she didn't, because here's the twist. As an actor, and I was a good actor, meaning I could take a part and play it, but I didn't look the part of anything for any job. I was not an ingenue. Don't forget, I was androgynous. Even if I put on a dress, I was androgynous, you know, and I couldn't get an ingenue role because I looked too much like a guy. I couldn't play a kid because I was too tall. I couldn't play a character role because I really didn't have the character look, you know, and so I didn't get acting jobs. All my friends out of the academy got acting jobs almost all right away. The ones who graduated, the ones who were good, you know. They all got jobs, whether they were small or large, you know, or on Broadway or in summer stock. They all got jobs. I didn't, you know. I was up for jobs. I was up for Godspell. I was up for Charlie Brown, but I didn't get them.
And how did that make you feel? Did that like help justify your desire to go into music, or did you beat yourself up about that?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I was like, okay, I've tried this. You know? And in the meantime, I was playing in clubs. You know, I'd go down and play on the they used to call them hootenanny nights, you know, not open mics, you know. I used to go down to the clubs in the Village, and of course I lived in the Village too, the West Village, but I used to go down and play music for passing the hat. Yeah, I didn't have any money. You'd get money, and you'd get a hamburger. You know, they'd feed you, and you could pass the hat. Well, that's how I lived for, you know, the first year, you know, and then while I was going to school, you know, I mean, my parents paid for the school, but I paid for everything else. Mm-hmm. Those were the days, you know, when you know, my parents did not have money. And so then after I tried to get work for a few months after school, I said, okay, screw it, you know, and I went to LA. And in 1973, and that's when, and I lived, you know, I lived on somebody's couch who I didn't know for a couple months, and then I lived in Bob Crew's basement storage place, that had a loft bed. And then I worked in gas stations. I pumped gas. I did everything that everybody does, and I played in little clubs, although LA was very hard to find clubs to play in. It wasn't New York, it's a different vibe, and so anyway, and then I started getting little gigs and backup vocals with Bob Crew and other people at Cherokee. And then I met Elton and I met Bob Newirth,
Yeah. So can we talk about your androgyny? You've talked about it in terms of your acting career and it getting in the way potentially of getting roles. And you've talked about people not being able to gender you on site. How are you feeling about all of that? Were you just like, oh, like, this is just who I am, who cares? Or was there an internal struggle about that?
Both. I went through mostly during that time. Let me back up a little bit. When I was 19 or 20 and I was in New York City, I went to the New York Public Library to find out what I was. Now, nobody in New York, none of my friends at the Academy, American Academy, knew about my internal struggle. Nobody knew. They didn't. I was asexual, basically. I didn't have boyfriends. I didn't have girlfriends. I was pretty much asexual at the Academy. I had a female roommate who is still my best friend to this day, who we're total friends. Yeah, still my best friend to this day. And I had a roommate who was a woman. We never crossed boundaries. And I had a best male pal, who I'm also friends with today, who I did try, because he wanted to have a relationship with me, and I kind of tried, but it was like, no, let's be friends. And so I was asexual, and I didn't tell anybody anything. Maybe Pam, my best friend, knew. Maybe I told her at some point, but basically not. So but in the middle of this, on my own, I went to the New York Public Library, and I went to, I guess there was a gender studies some kind of, aisle there. And I pulled out a book and I sat down and I saw the word transsexual. And I thought, well, I guess that's me. And there was an address in the book. And it was Tulane University in Louisiana. And I went back to my place and I wrote a letter and I sent it to this address. And I asked for all the information that I can get on changing my gender. This was 1970. And about 3 weeks later, I got this big manila package in the mail. And I tore it open. Nobody was around. I tore it open. There were all these pamphlets and just info booklets and, where to go to get hormone replacement therapy, where to go for therapy itself, just all this information on what a transsexual was. Now, who knew back then? And I read it all, and I have this line in the show where after I talk about ripping open the envelope and everything, and I say, I can do this. I can do this. And then there's a pause, and I say, I can't do this. I can't do this. And I couldn't do it. How could I do it? I was 20 years old. I was alone. I couldn't tell my parents. They weren't the type of people I could tell. I didn't even tell my friends. I had no money. There were a plethora, many, many reasons why I could not do it. And I threw everything away and put it out of my mind.
Oh, wow.
And went on from there. So that was a moment in my life where I addressed it, I found out what it was, and then I said, can't happen. Not going to happen.
And so was the dialogue with yourself, no, I'm not transgender, or yes, I am, but actually, because of all of these external factors, I'm not going to pursue this?
No, it was yes, I am.
Okay.
And there was no transgender. Again, I'll say it was
Sorry.
transsexual.
Yes. Yeah.
No, that's okay. Now it's easier. We're trans, we're this, we're that. There's much more of an acceptance now and even a knowledge. The only person that I even had heard about back in 1970 was this trans woman in the 50s named Christine Jorgensen, who was an American woman who went to, and I don't know the story and I could be misquoting and somebody else would know all the facts, but what I remember is she did have surgery, but I think she went to Europe or something.
Yes,
and anyway,
yeah.
she was a she was a soldier in World War II and transitioned and became very famous. And that was the only person I knew of at the time that was transsexual. And I didn't know her, obviously, but I mean, that was even a figure in history. I knew from the time I was 4 years old that I was a boy in a girl's body. There was no question about it. There's not, to this day, I don't have a female bone in my body except my body. My physical being, my physical birth sex is female.
Mm-hmm.
My brain, forget about it. I don't identify with anything female. Nothing. I mean, I'd call myself a typical trans man now and the reason I use that word is because when back in 2011, when I started researching and said, oh my God, I'm going to look into doing this now. I don't have a relationship. I've been single for 10 years. My daughter's married and has a kid of her own. I'm responsible to no one. I'm finally going to address this core issue of myself. So when I started doing the research, me, found out that there's a whole spectrum of gender. I didn't know that. I didn't know there were non-binary people or people that felt that they had no gender. I didn't know there was a spectrum of gender. I knew there was a spectrum of sexuality. I knew there were bisexual people and gay people and straight people, whatever, and a spectrum in between. I did not know that there was a gender spectrum until I started looking into transitioning myself. So I call myself a typical trans man, and I hope people don't get offended by that. This is about me, because I'm on the flat side of the other side of the gender spectrum. I was born a guy, and I like women, even though I was married to a man for 20 years. But don't forget, I was married to a gay man, and that's a whole nother story. I am a guy. I like guy things, and not to be binary about it, because we all, obviously, I had girlfriends in high school and grade school, but I couldn't play with dolls. I didn't like pink. I rebelled against anything female. Do I have a female side to me? Of course. I had testosterone. I had estrogen running through my body. I bore 2 babies. I breastfed them both, which I loved, by the way. So those are the singular experiences of my body being female that I cherish, that I wouldn't give up for anything in the world. I wouldn't give up being pregnant and bearing my 2 babies, even with Jesse dying. I wouldn't give that up. I wouldn't give up breastfeeding them both, which I loved, because it bonded me with my children. I feel like I have had, with all my struggle, with all of my confusion about sexuality and gender and who am I and what am I and what am I going to do about it? And what can I and can't I do about it? And, throughout my entire life, being misunderstood, being misgendered, being everything, all of that. But I'm still grateful that I had the opportunity to bear children and to have children myself, me having them, me bearing them, me watching them come out, me putting them on my chest, me having my newborns breastfeed out of my own breasts. I hated my breasts, by the way. Hated them. Hid them every time I got out of the shower. Hated them. And that was the only experience twice in my life that I felt they were useful for, that I was grateful to have them for. I despised them because they were the physical presence that I looked at. Now, of course, I have other body parts, but those to me represented the part of me that I couldn't hide, even though I didn't have big breasts. And my daughter says nobody noticed the difference, but that's another story. And, to me, they were, they were the physical presence that I couldn't hide.
Reminder. Yeah.
Yes.
So if we can go back to that, like getting rid of the contents of that envelope and deciding like, I can't do this. I'm not going to go forward with this. How did that impact on your interpersonal relationships and romantic relationships if you were making this decision? Or was it just that you buried it so deep that it just didn't come up on your radar?
Well, I mean, yes, I threw them away and put that thought away that I could ever transition. And I kind of bumbled my way through. Now, it didn't change the way I looked or the way I dressed I dressed like a guy. Mm-hmm. That's the way I dressed, unless I absolutely had to kind of dress myself up. And I don't mean in a dress. The only time I ever wore dresses after high school, after school, was when I was living in Westport, Connecticut with my husband at the time and having 2 kids. And I really made an effort in the 80s to try to be a woman, and that was like 3 times, and that was it. And then I finally said, ain't gonna happen again, because I was so uncomfortable. But anyway, back to the envelope and back to that moment, I put them away, or I threw them away, and just put it in the back of my brain. And as I said, I bumbled my way forward. I did not want physical romantic relationships. Now, did I want to be alone? No. I wanted somehow to have some kind of human contact with people. But I felt so uncomfortable in my own skin that I avoided it like the plague. Now, this comes into my drug addiction and alcoholism because I did start using drugs really heavily. I did, and which I was not in New York in acting school. I mean, I smoked marijuana and I had a few glasses of wine, but I was not addicted to anything. When I got to Los Angeles, I did my disease, which was already there, I'm sure, of alcoholism and drug addiction, started really progressing. And a lot of that, I think, had to do with my uncomfortability, my discomfort with who I was. Mm-hmm. And I did, have some episode, a one-off here, a one-off there with both men and women. I mean, I wasn't a person who went and sought out one-night stands, but I would, if somebody had good, I had one thing which I never talk about because I'm writing my memoir now, so you're getting things fresh off the page. I have to be honest in this memoir. I have to dig deep. And fortunately or unfortunately, as I've said, I have journals that go back 50 years. So I'm reading about myself, which is not a pretty picture back in those days, and my choices both personally and professionally. And I'm reading about my drug addiction and my budding alcoholism and my choices. And so I was not somebody who sought out one-night stands. I was not sexually active in the sense that I needed sexual activity. I really wasn't sexually driven in terms of sexual desire. I was more, if I had an encounter with someone, it was more about just physical contact. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But behind that is that I couldn't do it without the effects of drugs and alcohol.
Okay.
I couldn't be with you physically without being under some kind of influence. I just couldn't. So that's a whole nother story, intimacy issues and stuff like that. But I think it's all based on my physical discomfort with my body. And I didn't have that much attraction to anybody. I'm going to say this, and I hope it doesn't sound too, egotistical or anything, but I had charisma back then. And I had a look. My androgyny served me well in terms of my appearance. My appearance served me well. My chi, as my wife would say, served me well. And I like to say, people of all four varieties attracted to me. Straight men, straight women, gay men, and gay women. I was hit on a lot. I did not respond a lot, but I was. Don't forget the environment I was in. It wasn't like I was locked up in my room writing books. I was out playing. I was out performing. So don't forget, it was the environment. Everybody got hit on a lot. Anybody who was in rock and roll. So it wasn't about me alone. If you had big hair and wore bell bottoms and was at all attractive and was in rock and roll, you got hit on. My thing was that people didn't know if I was a boy or a girl most of the time. But it's back to your question, what did I do about it? And
yeah, and my question wasn't necessarily about like sexual activity and having a sexual partner. It was more about like intimacy and being open and trusting other people and whether or not that...
No, I didn't trust anybody. No.
Okay.
No. I mean, I trusted you in a way. I trusted you to do the right things. I trusted you to tell me the truth, but I didn't trust giving my body to anybody. Mm-hmm. If you said, I know that sounds weird, but I had a naivete that I did trust people that they were going to be good people. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
But I didn't trust... If I found out that your motives were not the best, then I was done.
Shall we circle back then to find out about why you chose Elton? So you had these two opportunities, two little-known musicians that no one's ever heard of, Bob Dylan and Elton John, and you were like, well, I could go with Bob Dylan, I could go with Elton, but you decided on Elton. What was the thought process?
It's really very simple. I wanted to be a rock and roller. There was nobody more famous than Elton John. It was more internal for me. It was more like, I want to experience what it's like to be on stage in front of 60,000, 80,000, 50,000 people. And Elton John, there was nobody more famous than Elton John in 1975 and 76. Nobody. Not one person on earth. And I had never seen one of his shows, but I knew what they were. I knew that he had hit after hit after hit. I knew who Elton John was. Are you kidding me? Goodbye Yellow Brick Road was one of my favorite albums of all time. It was the album that he was out. He had just recorded Rock of the Westies, which was the name of the tour that I was hired for. So I hadn't heard those songs. It was just coming out. And Goodbye Yellow Brick Road was right before it. And Dylan, I was never a huge Dylan fan, even in high school. I mean, I appreciated him. I played his songs on guitar. I, was, knew that he was as influential musically as anybody in the music business. But I was not drawn to folk music. And Bob Dylan, I appreciated highly his songcraft, his impact socially in the world. Of course I knew that. I grew up in the 60s. That was the decade of social change. I was right smack in the middle of it. So I knew his impact, but he didn't move me in the same way, gutturally, physically, as rock and roll. And Elton moved me. And really, that's why. Now, Bobby Newirth will tell you I made a big mistake, because he saw me as a singer-songwriter and somebody who could make an impact in that way, which, of course, later in my life, that's what happened. My songwriting became my ticket. But at that time, and also, I didn't know, Bob Dylan wouldn't know me today if he fell over me. I didn't have a personal relationship with Bob. The minute Elton walked up to me in that party, he looked me in the eye, and I knew, and even after I said my name is Cindy, even if he thought I was a young guy, he saw me. And without hearing me sing, he hired me to go on the road with him 2 days later.
Yeah. And that's kind of an incredible part of this story. So you were hired to be a singer without having auditioned or anything. Were you kind of shitting yourself before you showed up to rehearsals that they're going to hear me and go, oh, that's not what I had in mind? I of course I was nervous, of course. You're showing up and everybody's already been hired, and I found out later they fired somebody, to hire me. Oh, gosh.
I didn't know that at the time. I also didn't know that in between Wednesday and Friday, when rehearsal started, that somebody must have said to Elton, you better make sure she can sing. So they did. They confirmed that I could sing. I had done some things. So, but I wasn't so nervous that I wouldn't perform in that way, because I knew from my little bit of experience that I had a voice that could blend. That's what I was doing. I was doing background singing with people. Uh-huh. So I knew that in fact, I had, that's probably the best quality of my voice. My voice, I don't think is the best solo voice in the world. It's not, it is what it is, but I'm not a great singer, but as a background vocalist, I could blend with anybody. And I knew that. I had already worked with some of the best background singers in the world. I'd already worked with Timothy Schmidt from Poco, who I thought was like one of the best singers in the world. So, I knew that I could sing backup. So that wasn't nerve-wracking. What was nerve-wracking was walking into a rehearsal with Elton John and his band, and being the new kid on the block and having to learn the songs. These people, the new backup singers that he had hired, had the records for weeks to learn the songs. I had literally. So Wednesday night I meet him. Thursday afternoon, a limo pulls up in my little cracked driveway off Laurel Canyon in my little hovel, which it was, this little tiny little apartment with an orange shag rug and no bathroom door. And a limo pulls in, and a guy gets out, and literally he has a stack of Elton John albums that were, in my mind, a foot tall already in 1975. And he hands them to me, and the rehearsal starts the next day. So I have no time. Now, I know some of his songs. We hear the songs on the radio, so I know many of the songs in my mind. You sing along in the radio and stuff like that, but I don't know what part I'm singing. I don't know, all of his really old ones from 1970, and stuff like that. I know more, from 72 on. So I'm showing up in less than 24 hours after having the albums dropped off to me to sing.
Wow. And so do you remember anything about that first rehearsal?
Yeah. I remember, walking in and saying hello to everybody and being nice. And, what we kind of split up into groups. And Davy Johnstone, who everybody knows and still with Elton to this day, very sweet man. He kind of, because he sang too, it wasn't just the three background vocals. He also sang on the records and on stage. So he guided us through, and luckily I'm really quick, very fast. So, we just got through it, but I was totally in awe of everything that was going on around me and trying to kind of keep my head about me so that I could learn what was going on, what I had to do, because God forbid I screwed up, So I was coming in kind of under the 8 ball, but I did it.
And so do you remember that first night in San Diego?
Oh, God, yes. I have a whole scene about it in my show, well, a whole paragraph of just he in that tour, Rock of the Westies tour, Elton went on first by himself, and he sang Your Song. Mm-hmm. So he would walk up the riser onto the stage. So the first night, he came out of his dressing room. I was already standing out in the hallway of the San Diego sports arena before they all had corporate names, and followed him quietly. I mean, I didn't touch him or talk to him or say anything, because I wanted to see, I wanted to witness, and I stood below at the bottom of the riser that his piano. If you're looking out to the audience, his piano was more stage right. The backup singers were behind him, and then the band is to his left, stage left. The background singers were behind him, stage right. And he goes up on stage right riser to his piano, and of course you can hear the thunderous cheers. Just this wall of sound from the audience. And I standing there, and the lights come up, of course, and it's just otherworldly. And of course we all can hear it because we all know these chords. He puts his hands on the piano, dun, 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 starts playing the first few notes of Your Song. The crowd gets even wilder. And then he sings, It's a Little Bit Funny, and even louder. And I'm standing down below, and maybe there were people around me, maybe there weren't. I see myself alone. Of course, there were probably other people there. I was completely entranced and listening and thinking, I'm here. This is me. I'm here. I'm witnessing this. And after he finishes the song, I walk up that riser and onto the stage. And there are no words in the English language anyway that can describe what it's like to walk on stage and have Elton John right in front of you, only a few feet, maybe at the most, 6 feet, 7 feet, 10 feet, not far from where I'm standing. And hearing this crowd cheering, beyond, you've been to a rock concert, you've been to these things. Well, I'm up on stage, it's an otherworldly experience. And I experienced that every single night for a year and a half, 3 tours.
Wow. Wowzers. What are some of your best memories from those tours?
I don't know. My best memories are, first of all, the most magical night of all, and I just wrote about it in my memoir, was the second show of Dodger Stadium. And on October 26th, 1975. So it was the last show of that particular tour. We had the James Cleveland Choir, which was a gospel choir, big gospel choir at the time, on stage. Billie Jean King, who was a friend of Elton's, who I had met during the tour, was up there on stage, not the whole time, but singing back up with us on the encores. And there were some other extraneous things for me. I was a huge sports nut. I was a huge baseball fan. So for me to be in Dodger Stadium itself was a thing. I mean, I ran around the bases. I walked through the dugouts. These are things that were important to me and maybe not important to anybody else. But the show, the second night especially, I can remember, I think this is the quintessential memory of that tour, was being on stage singing "Don't Let the Sun Go Down on Me" as the sun is literally setting in the back, the way the stadium is set. The sun goes down in the middle of the bleachers in the back, or in the middle. I think home plate. Anyway, the middle of the stadium, the sun goes down. So we're looking out from the stage, and in the middle we're looking straight at the sun going down as we're singing "Don't Let the Sun Go Down on Me." And the audience, almost the immediate second it disappears behind the stadium, it seemed like 60,000 people all had lighters. And they all flicked on. Like boom, 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 boom. At the same time the sun was going down. And they were all singing. And you could feel the hairs on the back of your neck go up. Everybody did. Everybody did. It was like we were all just levitating, including the audience, off the ground. And there wasn't a person who witnessed that who won't tell you the same story. That, of course, from their own perspective, but the sense of it, the feeling of it, was one of those moments in life, one of those singular moments in life where everything is perfect and in order, and everybody is, I'm going to say it, but it's true, everyone was at one with each other.
How powerful.
It was a singular moment in time. And that, it is what it is. That's the singular moment. That's a moment I will never forget as long as I live. That's my a big memory.
Oh. Do you remember what the last night that you performed with Elton?
Madison Square Garden in 1976 was August something, late August. Madison Square Garden, I think we did 7 nights or some stupid thing. And I can remember being, so this is late September of 76. I got sober in mid-November of 76. So I was really at the end of my own battle with cocaine, which was my drug of choice. And it had impacted me throughout the tours in terms of my mental state, let's put it that way. And by the end of the Louder Than Conquered, Not Quite As Pretty tour, we started in Europe in late March, and we really didn't break until the end of August of the same year. So it was close to 6 months of constant touring. And everybody was fried. Everybody was worn out. Everybody was tired. And for me, personally, not talking about anybody else, I was close to a breakdown because of the stress and because of my own addictions. And so for me, the end, the touring was a wonderful thing, but everybody started getting frayed,
Yeah.
And because that's what happens, if you're going from one place to another, you're on. And I'm only speaking for I will say that everybody was tired, but only speaking for myself, I was really frayed. I was really undone and tired and was at the end of my rope with my own, and I knew that I had a problem. And I was at the end of the rope with my own problem, and I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do about it. So by the end of the tour, even though the shows themselves were still inspiring and still wonderful and still an incredible experience, personally, I was spent. And so by the end of the last tour, for me, it was a relief to stop. And I got off the road, and within the next couple of months got my shit together, as we'll say. And thank God, by the grace of God, I don't know, and I don't even know if I believe in God, but say by the grace of something other than myself, and support. So it was a kind of a double-edged sword, or at least a dual picture for me at the end of the tours. Because while it was still an incredible experience, and the shows were absolutely wonderful, and the experience was wonderful. I mean, Madison Square Garden, all the stuff. I was personally not in a good place, and that impacted me. And though I did my job, I felt like I was not at my best.
You were just done. You were just ready to be over.
Yeah. But again, if I had been a sober human being, a clean and sober human being in the beginning, I wouldn't have, so the drugs really did impact me, my drug usage. And again, I only speak for myself, my drug usage. I was a drug addict. I'm an alcoholic and a drug addict, and I've been sober now for almost 45 years.
Wow.
So November 13th will be my 45th anniversary of when I stopped. So it was a gift to have that stark contrast of being in, now I'm talking personally and about this, but it was a gift for me to be in that stark contrast of being on stage with the biggest, most famous, the best, in my opinion, rock and roll solo artist of all time, and to be drowning in my own drug addiction and alcoholism. The dichotomy of the two things, and trying to reconcile those two things, for me, was the breaking point. And because I knew where I was, I knew what I was doing, I knew the opportunity I was being given, I knew who I was with, and yet I was dying on the inside. I could literally have been dying on the inside. And screwing up in my own mind, not at my best, not presenting. And I knew all of that. I was aware of it. So it was hard. It was hard for me. And I do think God or the universe or whatever it is we call it, what anybody calls it, whatever. I think something, my higher power, as we say in AA, and I am outing myself and I don't care. After 45 years, I really don't care who knows and who doesn't. But I really do think, let's say, the greater good for that dichotomy, for that split. Because had it not been so, it may have taken years more for me to come to terms with my own disease.
Do you have any memories from dancing, drinking, meeting people, and having adventures on your own queer scene that you want to share? Well, if you do, please get in touch. I want to create the biggest online record of people's memories and stories. Go to lostspacespodcast.com and find the section Share a Lost Space and tell me all about what you got up to. You can also reach out to me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter as Lost Spaces Pod. Find out more about Cidny at his website, cidnybullens.com, CIDNYBULLENS.com. You can also follow him on Twitter at Cidny Bullens or on Instagram at cidbullens. Lost Spaces is not only a podcast, but a concept record as well. I have been writing songs about queer venues and the people who used to live their lives there, and will be releasing songs over the next year. You can hear the first single, Well Groomed Boys, which is also playing underneath my talking right now on all streaming platforms. If you liked this episode, I would really appreciate if you subscribed, left a review on your podcast platform, or just told people who you think might be interested in giving it a little listen to. I am Kay Anderson, and you have been listening to Lost Spaces.